Monday. I'm not sure what rules and restrictions have been released. I haven't been able to keep up. I found it safer just not to go very many places. If some of you can inform me, I would be desperately appreciative of that. It's all been too confusing. I feel like a lot of you will empathise. I actually wrote an article for The Sun the other day called FOGO, which was fear of going out. I don't have a fear of going out. I just have a fear of what there is, if that makes sense. It's very weird. It's a weird experience. Now I'm going to have to get myself back out there. Did think restaurants were open, but don't think they might be now because everyone's talking about beer gardens. And I don't know about any of you, but as much as I love people, I really don't like being in the cold. Like, for example, right now I'm sat with 2 hot water bottles behind me. That is partly to do with the other day I leant forward and was doing quite a few interviews, and when I stood up I pulled my back because it appears that getting old is actually something that takes nothing but just being to quite badly damage yourself. I don't know if any of you can empathise with that. It's just genuinely a sense of just existing is dangerous over 40. This is a new experience for me, but it is happening here and now. Agony from doing nothing. Also, if you notice there's a black background behind here, whilst it is not a tribute to Vince Phillip, although I'm very, very sad that obviously somebody has lost their father. It's awful, and I'm very glad that everyone's being very respectful about that. It's actually because I do the crime podcast and stuff, so we've got it to do that. So it's not like I've redecorated in some kind of tribute in that respect. Also, just to say, I saw somebody put up about Nikki Graham. I knew Nikki. She was one of the loveliest human beings that you could have ever had the pleasure to meet. And I really mean that. I'm not just saying it. I spoke to Nikki on many occasions, and she was as sweet as you would have imagined. And I think it's very important to reflect on how many people have struggled with their mental health so desperately that they won't be coming out of lockdown. I think we concentrate a lot on loss in the past 12 months, but I don't think we've necessarily concentrated a great deal on what we all understand, which is that mental health is in massive decline. And it's not just going to end now, that the things are starting to change a little bit, whatever that means. Mental health is something that obviously has been affected on multi-levels, and unfortunately because of that we know that we'll have lost people that we didn't need to lose, so to speak, because of things like suicide. And also that some people will be locked into a cycle now of eating disorders and gambling addiction and all of those things. So when you think about Nikki Graham, she kind of resonates with me for a lot of reasons. Aside from the fact that she's an awesome human being, she really was, it's more that she personifies so many of the things that I think we haven't talked about in the past 12 months. And even though I'm starting to see in the papers now comments on mental health decline, children's mental health decline, children have been horrifically treated in the past 12 months. I said that right at the beginning. I say that now. I will say that for the rest of my life. It's a disgrace. But we are going to have to really watch society now, aren't we? Because I think as we're coming out of lockdown and meeting people that we might not have seen for a long time, it's just recognising those people who've maybe had a real decline in their mental wellness. Some people have been quite lucky. I've seen comments on Facebook saying they can't wait for the next lockdown because they'll be furloughed again. And I'm not saying that most people feel like that. I'm saying that some people have fared okay. But for those of us, and most of us who haven't, I think Nikki really does personify that experience of lockdown, gyms closing, not being able to see people. Even if you've got a supportive family as she did, it just isn't the same as being able to be social. I was reading some research actually today and looking at how wrong we've gone. And I say that without any fear because I absolutely can evidence it. When it comes down to how we're meant to live, you know, we're meant to live lovingly, socially, in a connected way. If you look at bonobo chimps, you know, if you want to look them up afterwards, bonobo, we're probably really the most closely related to that primate in particular. And bonobos are amazing. So if you look at Washu Can and Kanzi Can't, there's an experiment where obviously they've used chimpanzees and bonobo chimps to look at intelligence and use lexigraphs, and lexicograms where you can actually spell words out. And there was one particular bonobo chimp who could actually communicate but really effectively using sign and lexigraphs, and it was amazing to see how similar we were, particularly when you think how we treat them. But bonobos basically just love each other all day. That's all they do. They live in harmony and they're incredibly loving and incredibly tactile and incredibly giving, and it's all about a perfectly evolved society. And as opposed to what we've done, which has become more and more individualistic. And I mean that on a level of not that we don't want to be with other people, but that we have become more individualistic because of the fact that our houses have become very insular. And I was saying this, I think, the other night, if anybody joined me, that convenience has become very inconvenient. You think about when people used to go to the washrooms when they were dealing with all the washing, and you couldn't do that in your home because it wasn't available. My mum didn't even have a fridge. You know, there was a lot more community experience, shopping on a daily, kind of connecting us with each other. And we've become more and more inconvenient through convenience, which is that we don't really connect. And so as we come out of lockdown and start figuring out our new way of being, I think that has to begin with noticing the people that we maybe realise have had real struggles during this period of time. And it might be us that needs to ask for that help as well. Just wanted to say that. Oh, how to cope with a lost dog, struggling and crying most nights. I'm not surprised. They're your family. So first of all, I suppose the big thing is, like, have you got as much help as possible in finding your dog? Because the consequence of getting on Facebook and telling people that you've lost a dog, putting pictures out and all of those things. Oh, has he died? Oh, sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Pete's tried to mouth to me. It said lost dog. It says how to cope with a lost dog. So I read it as a lost dog. I mean, it's really hard. Sorry, Pete typed it wrong. I apologise. Loss of a dog. Basically, I lost my Molly Boo this year, and honestly, I'm not going to lie, it is comparable with losing a member of your family because you dote on them. So first of all, don't underestimate your grief. I've written about this lots. One of the things that people tend to do when it's an animal is people underestimate your grief. They imagine, particularly if they've never had an animal, because I don't think people get it. I really don't. And I do kind of let them get away with the fact that they don't get it. Because unless you've felt the connection that you have with an animal, it's impossible to imagine. You know, people look at people and they imagine that that's a very different relationship to losing an animal. But if you have an animal like that's sentient, particularly like a dog or a cat, but dogs in particular, then it's literally a member of your family. And you always know when you get a dog that that's going to eventually happen. There's an inevitability about it. And I guess one of the big things that you have to do is concentrate on the worth of the life, not the moment of the death. And I think that we do a lot in Western society to focus on death as if that's the defining moment. But actually that isn't the defining moment. The defining moment is the experiences that you've had, the little miracles that that dog brought to your life and the person you became through it. And I say that with real truth because Molly Boo changed me. I miss her so much, and you miss your dog so much. But every single part of what she was to me made me part of who I am today. And it's sometimes difficult to kind of have that gratitude at a point where you're still grieving. I still am at a point where I can't look at pictures of her. So I'm still at that point where I haven't got full gratitude because I'm still bearing the loss. But for you, understand that your grief is real. It is as poignant and powerful and disabling and agonising as it will be to lose somebody that is close to you. Secondly, like I say with grief per se, there isn't an easy route through it. You just kind of have to acknowledge and let it be. And you have to recognise, as people who watch me regularly, it's love in disguise. That's what grief is. And also ask yourself this question, and it's a question I ask myself about my dad every time. And I mean this with absolute conviction. You could put me on a lie detector test and I would pass it. The big question I ask myself is, if I knew out of all the fathers in the world that I could pick one, but I had to accept the terror and horror of the end, would I still pick my father? And beyond a shadow of a doubt, it wouldn't matter whether they were billionaires, millionaires, it would not matter. I would choose him. And I imagine that that's how you feel about your dog. That's certainly how I feel about Molly. Like, I chose her and I chose my dad. You know, they came into my life for a reason. And if I focus on it that way, it takes the sting out of the tail, so to speak. And whilst I would never for 1 minute suggest that you have to go and get another dog at some point, in the fact that you're going to have to make a judgment call yourself, I always feel like people who have had dogs and love them have this amount of love within them that could really soothe and save another animal. And one of the things that I am going to say is, even though you're going to need some time, rescue shelters are going to be breaking at the seams. I hate to say that, but it's going to happen. Anybody who's bought a dog during lockdown and then ends up going back to work full time is going to have a problem. There are all these things that people have not put into the equation. Dogs are amazing. They keep you company. They make you feel loved. They're always happy to see you. But it's not that great when they've got separation anxiety and they rip your house to pieces or become behaviourally incredibly difficult. And that's when people put them in shelters. So to some degree, if you can at some point start thinking about that direction of love, and at the moment you won't want to, it'll be like there's no dog like your dog. But just remember that part of your journey, part of your meaning to this world is that you do have a space for that kind of affection. And I do think that everybody should always see things that way. It's not about what the dog can do for you, it's about what you can do for that animal, because there'll be an animal out there who would benefit hugely from the legacy of love that you have for that animal. But the main thing is just to accept that some people won't get it and to forgive them for that. And those who do get it, make sure you bring that animal into the room and you're honest with yourself and you let yourself cry and you let yourself grieve. And like I said, life bubble wraps it doesn't get rid of it. And you don't want it to. None of us want to get rid of our grief. Imagine what a faceless, soulless, hurt human being would be if somebody that we love could just die and we'd just like get over it. It's a really weird perspective, isn't it? You're not meant to. You're meant to carry it with you. That's what grief is. It's like a bit of baggage that you have to put on, and it's a bit of a burden, but it's also something that gives you a real soulfulness. So it's one that you wouldn't want to let go of, if that makes sense. But I'm really sorry as well that I thought it was a lost dog. I can blame my husband though, because he did write it wrong. Hi Emma, I don't know if you see this, but I'm having a really bad day today with my mental health and I don't know if I want to be here. It's terrifying. And struggling with depression, so I'm putting these together, trying to stay strong on the outside, put on a front. It's all consuming, insurmountable, just can't be bothered. Feel bad as luck in... Pete, can you just move that because I can't see it? Feel bad as lucky in so many ways. Yeah, still finding it difficult. Do people get through this? Any advice, please? I'll put those two together. So first of all, if you are feeling suicidal, and remember, like there is no shame in feeling suicidal. I think we have to get past that. Feeling suicidal is a feeling, it's an experience, it's not a failure, it's not because you're doing something wrong, and it's not because you're a bad person, it's because you are having a feeling. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because what feelings are about is prompts. We don't often explore feelings in that way, but as a lot of you who watch these regularly will know, part of mindful practice, which is something that I've studied and teach, is prompts. So recognizing that a feeling is not there to terrorize you or punish you, it's there to educate you and move you through it. So if you think about suicide, it's about escape, right? There's this sense of a final solution, a permanent solution. But if you think about it as a prompt and you actually say, I feel like I want to escape. So what is it teaching me? It's teaching me that actually I need to process. I need to accept and process and stay and be still with these feelings. So instead of trying to avoid them or run away from them, it's teaching you to accept them and to then allow them to be worked through by, let's say, calling an ambulance if you really are suicidal to that point. And I mean that because you're working through it then. You're going, okay, I'm going to create some calm around this suicidality. I'm going to accept that those feelings are there. And I'm going to recognize that it's not about me escaping, it's actually about me confronting. So we're giving the counter and we're going to confront it. And it might be calling a friend and saying, hey, I'm going to say these words, I'm really struggling, I'm feeling like I don't want to be here. Because by doing that and acknowledging it, you're beginning the process of staying with the feeling, but allowing it to be confronted. And when we confront it sensibly and usually with support, it becomes a lot less terrifying. Whereas if we just go with the terror and fear, and that's what happens with suicidality and suicidal feelings. There's almost this like overwhelming panic. And again, if we're reactionary to panic, think about it. When there's a crisis going on, the last thing anybody wants is somebody panicking. It's why you see in stupid films always a woman, of course, screaming, because it would never be a man. I mean, man never panics, apparently. But anyway, it's why the woman gets slapped across the face, right? It's to calm them down. It shouldn't happen. But what they're showing you there is that kind of panic doesn't work. It's not effective. So what we want to do is withdraw from panic and create calm. So even if that means putting on a meditation, doing some breathing exercises, just allowing yourself to sit and be, that is again countering that terror and fear, because remember, fear is teaching us courage. The most important thing for you at the moment is firstly to stop the panic. The panic is feeding the fear. The fear is asking for the escape. The escape is creating that reaction to want to go and do something that ends the feeling. Whereas I'm saying there is no good or bad feeling, there is just an education of what we need to do. Everybody knows my saying, we don't kill the self, we kill the life. And at times there are variables and issues in our lives that need either solving or removing. So have you sat down and actually thought about that? Have you explored what isn't working in your life? Because life can change in an instant. It really can. What you think is fixed is always flexible. What you think is secure often shifts and changes. You need to kind of explore it in a more strategic way. And the reason for that is the minute that you take away the panic, the minute you allow yourself to kind of sit down and be absolutely present with the feeling and then be like, okay, what is this teaching me? What is going on in my world that feels so distraught orientating that I'm desperate to just create a solution? And can you see that the trying to create a solution, that's not a bad thing. You're just skipping all the steps. So you're trying to find a solution, it just happens to be a really shitty one that has a really permanent impact. It won't just affect you, it'll affect the people that love you. And it will affect the world, because good people who kill themselves are then one person who's less in this world, who's got kindness and compassion in their heart. That's really important. So try to just acknowledge this feeling and then think about strategy. Explore the things that need to shift and change. Sit down and write it down. Call the people that you need to call. If you don't have the support network, you're being taught, find a support network, and there's many. That's the thing about feeling stuck. We always feel stuck before progression. It's a difficult state, and at times it makes us feel trapped and scared and afraid, but actually it's just a moment before movement. And I think you really need to focus on that too. But as I've said, it's so essential that if you're feeling really suicidal, that you connect with people that can help you. And that can be immediately through the NHS, or it can be through friends and family, or even getting in touch with me on Facebook. Simple as that. You know, you can always send your address to us and we'll find that way forward. But the most important thing is not to do that thing where you're reacting to that feeling in a really panicky way, because that's when you lose control. And like I said, every single thing that you think is wrong, it can all be solved. That's one of the things that I know more than anything, having worked in therapy for a long time. Everything that you think is unsolvable is absolutely solvable. It really is. And it's almost like taking yourself away from that instant fear and bringing yourself into sharp focus and then saying, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And believe me, just that self-power, that taking that option can make a huge difference to the outcomes in your life. But like I said, I'm not going to be able to solve that in one monologue. So do please let me know or reach out to somebody in your family if you do get to that point where you're thinking, I can't go on, because there is always a solution every single day of the week. And when it comes down to the other question about feeling like you're lucky, and so you feel bad for your depression, if only that were the way things worked, right? If only if you were in a good relationship and you had enough money and you had a nice lifestyle, that meant you didn't have depression or anxiety or feel suicidal or feel depressed. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, if anything, having those things compounds the feeling, because you automatically feel guilty enough for having negative feelings about your life, but then additionalize that with everything in my life is great, what is wrong with me for not feeling this? That additionalizes the already problematic feelings. So cut all of that away. You're not dealing with anybody but the self at the moment. The human condition is that we feel uniquely. So you can't just look around you and say, be grateful. That's almost like slapping yourself around the face with even more negativity. It's more about saying, I'm really grateful for everything I have in my life. I feel that, I see that. But as an individual, I feel really sad. I feel really depressed. I feel like things aren't working out for me in the way that they're meant to. Because by at least meeting that feeling with a reality, then consequently that feeling is going to get heard. And it can be really hard sitting down with your partner and having that conversation. But let me tell you, every single partner who's ever lost a partner when they didn't need to things like suicide, they would do anything to have that conversation. And I'm not saying that's where you are. I'm saying that's how wrong we get it when we imagine that our partners don't want to hear from us about our wider world. They want to know about what's happening to us. They want to know how we feel. And it's hard to have that conversation, but it's also enabling. And that's what you need to do with these kind of challenging feelings. You're not choosing this feeling at all. You're choosing, ideally, to feel happy about what you've got, which is why you've got this guilt complex. But it's not a choice at the moment. It's a feeling. So again, it's very much about firstly acknowledging that you deserve help and support. Often the best place for that is family and friends. If not, it is worth going to your doctors just to have a conversation, because there's always therapy that you can look at. If you have the finances where you could maybe pay for some therapy, they're always available. Always go to the BACP if you want to kind of get a registered psychological therapist, or the BPS if you want to look at a psychologist. But there are lots of options that can give you the kind of help that you need. But it's all about recognizing that there is no shame in admitting your pain. There really isn't. It's been a period of mental anguish, and that might have been something that exacerbates an already problematic behavior, mindset and emotional state. Or it might be that it's something that's developed because of this and through this. One of the things that I always feel is there are pivotal moments in our lives, there really are, where Brené Brown called hers a spiritual awakening, but she also related it to it as a breakdown. If you know about Brené Brown, she was made famous by Oprah in a TED Talk and similar things like that. But I think it's how you see things, like a spiritual epiphany, a spiritual awakening, comes usually through crisis. And I don't think we're taught enough in our Western model to explore that, to actually explore what that means. Sometimes when we're feeling a period of crisis, it's almost like we've been told not to feel it, to avoid it, to hide it. And my job in my life is to just own it, to be able to just own it. Like there's no good or bad state, it's just a period of feeling. And it's almost like ultimately the more we try to run, the more we'll be chased. Whereas if we just stop and acknowledge and accept, then we have a period of transition, which is quite painful at times because we're listening to our emotions, but we're being present, and the present will inform us of what's next. And it's almost like practicing mindfulness or relaxation or yoga or any of those things that kind of frame the more Eastern model for dealing with things like depression and anxiety. The reason that there are people like yogis and there are people like Taoists and there are people from meditation gurus through to spiritual leaders, the reason that they're so at peace is because they are mindful of the now. They're not thinking about next day or last year. They're thinking about the now. They've acknowledged that there's only power over this. And often a lot of our lives are really compounded depression and anxiety-wise by always fearing what's happening next or always thinking that we haven't got enough. And I think that I can admit that I definitely sometimes fall into that trap. No matter how I try to practice these things, no matter how I try to talk about these things, I definitely at times fall into that trap. And it's really hard to pull yourself back from it. But I always know the most unhappy I am is when I'm fearing the future. It's like a cycle where I can actually feel it. I can feel that the minute I start thinking about the future, I start to fear it. And it's almost like that in itself tells me that there is absolutely no point. It's a fruitless exercise. If all I'm going to feel is panic and anxiety because I'm thinking about the future, well, that stinks. I'm just going to try to bring it back to the present. And it's not easy. My husband will be the first person to say, there will be periods where I'll be like really openly anxious about what I'm trying to plan. And you know what? I've learned the more I try to plan, the more the universe will knock that plan away from me. Like the more I hold on, the more I'll be told to let go. And it's almost like accepting that when you truly connect with the here and now, when you truly connect with the present, when you allow yourself that, it's not that there is an ultimate peace, it's that there is less panic, less anxiety, and also a real acceptance that this is all we have. And there's no point saying that this is impossible because there are many evidences that this is more than possible, or that, well, that's all right as long as you've got money. We haven't got money. Most people at the moment haven't got money, but that isn't true. Money is really important to eat and have a shelter, But wealth is not indicative of happiness. It really isn't. You can look all around the world and see when Costa Rica is one of the happiest places in the world and it's really poor. There are so many places that evidence it. You know, Bali, where I used to live years ago, happiest people that I've ever met, and they had nothing. So again, happiness and wealth is a centric Western model. It's not a reality. So again, bringing it to the present, what is now and what can I create in the now for me without being too fearful of what happens next? If we don't plan the way that, let's say, as was evidenced before, I want to kill myself. A lot of people do the planning. It's like, no, pull back from that. That's future. That's not happened. You don't need to go there. And it's almost like having that really stoic reaction to feelings. Obviously, as I always said, it's really important if you're acting on those kind of things to go and get help immediately. I just want people to stop being as afraid of the way that they feel. I feel like we've done a really good job on people making you feel broken, making you feel that you have conditions and all of these things, when sometimes you're just human and you're just reacting to really inhuman situations. That's one of the big things that I've learned since losing my dad, that there is this desire in our society to either shut up about things that are painful, ignore them, abuse them using things like alcohol, and stop talking about them at a certain point. And I refuse to do that, because that is giving into a model that's completely broken. If people want to know why they're really unhappy, well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, just look at our society. I'm sure that lots of you have had lots of happy periods, and when you look at it, it's probably when you felt loved and wanted and valued, and fleeting moments of contentment surrounded by people who really care for you, and holidays and times where you get to connect. You know, it's not hard to see when all we do in the UK is like work to live and live in boxes and don't communicate or have neighbour communities and all of those things that used to be a big part of our world. It's not surprising, is it, that we are losing our way as far as our emotional stability is concerned. And that's not because we're broken, it's because our needs are not being met. I think a lot of us have needs that are not being met, and it's time that we started to do that. Waited for lockdown to be over before I visited my granddad today. Lockdown eased and he passed away this morning. I have EUPD and it's hard to process. First of all, I have to say that there is a real beauty in that loss, which is that your granddad waited for you so you could go and see him before dying. I think on a transcendental level, for me, that's a real message to you. I know with EUPD, that's going to be a really potentially extreme feeling, because of course, you know, with EUPD, there can be those real feelings because of trauma anyway that feel absolutely huge, and managing that is going to be even more challenging for you. So not to take away for 1 minute your grief, and I shouldn't try to, because it's your grief and it's your granddad and you adored him, and you have had a year that has been taken from you and from him, and you would not have chosen it to be that way. And I don't care whether people are really into the fact that care homes were locked down or that people don't agree with it. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What matters is you didn't have that year. I feel that is something very tragic for you, and I wish that that hadn't happened. But again, because of my belief system, I think to myself, like, the fact that he died after you saw him, it's something that is difficult to cherish at this moment in time, but there is a sense that I feel, and hopefully that you can connect with, that this man waited because he wanted to see you, and that his final day was spent with somebody that he loved and that somebody who cherished him. And what a gift. I know it's really hard to find that right now, and it's not overriding the intense pain that you'll feel and the intense pain that you're meant to feel, because grief is really painful. It is love in disguise. It's an exquisite grief in the end. It really is. It's a pain, but it's so beautifully yours because of your connection with him. But reframing that at this moment in time is going to be challenging. Remember, you can't have any guilt for what's happened in the past 12 months. You did what you were told to do. You did the things that you were allowed to do. You didn't have a choice. So take away any guilt. Secondly, try to remember him in the way that you remember him best, you know, probably when you were younger and he was younger, and the fun that you had together. And then try as well to just remind yourself, wow, he waited to see me. that's something really powerful and really significant. To me, that's too much of a coincidence. I mean, I think synchronicity with the universe, she always knows what she's doing. And it's almost like a parting gift, because all of us are going to die. It's just one of those things that we don't like to talk about, which is ridiculous, because I'm not going to be here one day. There might be these videos that remember some woman who got older through the years, but then isn't here anymore. And that's our legacy. We live, we die. But I think for you, it's too early to even start knowing how you're processing this. Secondly, you may have EUPD, but you're human. That's what you are, much more than an EUPD. And just because you have a condition like EUPD or classification, that doesn't mean your reactions right now are any more extreme than somebody else's reactions, okay? Like, honestly, most people who lose somebody significant have extreme feelings, extreme chaos, sometimes extreme numbness, but always those feelings are extreme in nature because it's dealing with an overwhelming event. So please don't feel like you're meant to be feeling a certain way, or that the way that you feel isn't correct. It will be your way of coping. And like I said, there are things like Cruise, which is an organisation that does online counselling and telephone counselling. But the main bit is just to kind of focus on the life that was, not the death that is. Because death is always final, isn't it? Like, it's there live and then they're dead, and that's it. But the life has got vast meaning. And I'm sure that the memories that you have with him are hugely wonderful. And again, it really, for me, is too much synchronicity that you saw him on the one day that you were allowed to go, and you went straight there, and he'll know that. And then he died, because maybe that was his way of letting you know that you were that important to him. He made sure that he held on just that little bit longer so he could see you. I've been recently diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum. It means throwing up. I had it when I was pregnant. I'm presuming you are pregnant, because it says I'm constantly nauseated and vomit countless times during the day. It's really starting to affect my mental health. I've been prescribed medication to help manage it, but the side effects are horrid. I'd be grateful for any suggestions you might have. It's really getting me down. I had exactly the same with my first baby, so I absolutely empathise to, I really do. I think a lot of women, if you've had a child and then you start being sick constantly, and it can carry on constantly to the point like where you're hospitalised and put on drips, it's really awful. And it also kind of really affects the pregnancy. And the first thing I want to say to you is, it's completely normal for this to affect your mental health. Remember, you sold this ideal when you get pregnant. It's like, it's going to be great. You're going to bloom. I lost so much weight that I actually weighed less after having my child than I did like before. And during my pregnancy, I weighed the same as I did. I was induced 5 weeks early because I couldn't eat anything. So I know where you are, but I also know what got me through. And there are things that now I've learned about my condition that I would have done at the time, but I didn't research it. I just did what I was told. It says that you've actually been put on medication and the side effects are awful. I wasn't put on any medication, but obviously since then, I've learned quite a lot about the impact that this had on me. And because I was getting pregnant again, I didn't know whether it would reoccur, because it can reoccur. It didn't though, just to put it out there, it didn't. So there are things like vitamin B6, that's been said to have an impact. I think you take 3 tablets a day and you've not got to exceed like 200 milligrams. So vitamin B6 is really important. There are some things that you can get. Do you know motion sickness bands? So motion sickness bands can be really effective. They're the ones that are like acupuncture points. You can get them in Boots or Superdrug, on probably Amazon. I'll probably have them here in an hour if you ask for them. Ginger saved my life in everything. So ginger biscuits in the morning, ginger in drinks. Also, if you're taking any kind of pregnancy supplements, make sure that you check out what's in them, because sometimes they have a lot of iron in them. And if you have them in the day, that can make you really sick. Whereas if you have them at night, that will help. Also, you can get things like Benadryl, would you believe it? The antihistamine. Obviously don't OD on it, but you can get Benadryl and that will apparently reduce the nausea. Acupuncture definitely works. And there is another thing that you can do, which is there are particular smells, you know how it is, with this particular condition, smell really affects you. So things like peppermint, lemon, lime, they tend to be things that if you smell, it helps to calm the nausea. And also, bizarrely, and yet very true because it's what I lived on, bread toast, nuts, crackers. They're like basically bland carbohydrate is shown to help you get through that particular situation. The main thing to say though is it does end. It's horrible, but it ends. And the weird thing is that first pregnancy for me was so bloody awful that the moment he came out, the relief and, you know, the instant feeling of like wanting soup, I can still remember I wanted soup straight away. That kind of feeling, it exacerbates and volumizes the joy, honestly, that you have when you handed your child. So don't feel, as much as this is affecting your mental health, don't feel that there is anything wrong with you for feeling crappy about this, but try those things I've said. Obviously, speak to your doctor, particularly about things like, you know, what your medication and side effects are going to do. Because if you're having really bad side effects from something that's meant to stop you feeling bad, that doesn't seem like a great idea at the moment. You might want to go back to your doctor about that. The other thing I'd say is this channelmum.com, which is a really nice kind of site where you can go on the SOS forum and chat with other mums who are in similar situations. And it'll also have lots of information by health visitors and midwives. If you go on there, might have a look at that. That might give you some tips as well, because a lot of mums kind of share their tips there. But just remember, this is something that you're going through and it's temporary as much as it's horrible. And just keep a check as well, because it is possible to get depressed when you're pregnant because of hormones, and it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to the sickness. So make sure you check that out with your GP as well. But like I said, those natural remedies I think can be really, really helpful. What modality of therapy do you practice? That's a great question. I don't practice one particular therapy. My original therapy was like pure client-centered. So that's very much what you see on a lot of kind of films where people will say things like, I hear what you're saying, and mirroring and kind of engaging in a non-judgmental, unconditionally positive regard, congruent way. And I did that for 3 years. And then I moved on to doing integrative, which was like, you know, lots of different kind of areas. I've done trauma therapy, I've done some rational emotive therapy. I like the integrative model. I like anything that kind of is a bit creative. So transcendental, and I'm still training now. So I'm still doing things with people. I'm working with a psychologist at the moment who kind of is doing individual sessions with me on a particular type of trauma therapy. So I don't practice any one modality. I genuinely, when I was at Manchester University doing my first, it was originally the advanced diploma in counselling after I'd done my psychology degree, and it was a few years after I'd travelled. When I first did it, they used to show us videos, and I just used to be really objectionable because I don't understand how I could be like Rogers or Egan. Like, Rogers can be Rogers and Egan can be Egan, and you'd like watch the core conditions, and I'd watch Rogers and I'd be like, no, Carl Rogers isn't even client-centered. I just didn't buy into it. I was like, everyone has their own way. And I think congruence is a good word, because I think it means being deeply honest and kind of not being unafraid of the truth and all of those things, so in a compassionate way. And for me to be congruent, I have to be myself. But there are some people who are absolutely pure, so CBT, DBT, schema, whatever modality they particularly choose. Psychotherapy, even though that's my area that I belong to, there can be psychotherapy that is like intense 3-4 times a week, you know, very expensive. But, you know, some people love it. I constantly grow and train, but I think the kind of therapy that I do is Emma. That's it. It's why I always say that you can't train, I don't believe, a therapist. You can't train somebody to be in this work. You either feel it or you don't. That's probably why some people aren't in the right job. And it's often why people are in the wrong jobs and should be in this kind of job. I think you either feel it, you're born it, you grow it. I'm not saying that you don't learn from others. I'm saying it's something intrinsic within you, in my opinion. But everyone has a different opinion. Hi, Emma. My physical health is making me suicidal at times and depressed. I've undiagnosed serious gut issues. There's also caused skin reactions. I cannot socialise or go to the shops without feeling these intense anxiety due to my health, not making it possible to do the things. And I sit at home depressed. I have depressive disorder. I can't eat what I can't without pain and consequences. It equally gets me down. I feel hopeless and I don't want to live like this anymore. Okay. I'm definitely not a doctor, so I can't like advise you on any medication or what you can do with your chronic condition, because I don't really understand which it is. However, I would say kefir is amazing for gut health and actually has some really good links to overall wellness. So if Pete can put a link to Amazon where you can buy the grains and you can actually grow your own grains, like basically they're a bit like, they look like cottage cheese. It tastes a little bit like off milk when you're drinking it, which sounds disgusting, but believe me, probably off milk's a little bit too strong if I'm honest. It's probably more like a thick, slightly sour yogurt. But let me tell you, after like a week and a half of having it, you crave it every single morning. It's like something switches on in your brain and you suddenly want your kefir every single day. It's such a weird connection that you have with it. It's like you're craving it. Really, really helps with things like IBS, bad stomach, bloating, but also because it's microbiomes and it's not the ones that you buy in your yogurts. I'm sure the marketing is very good on it, but it's nowhere near the comparison. These are live microbiomes that you grow. You become quite attached to them actually because they kind of propagate each other. They kind of grow and grow and grow, and you can kind of like give them to friends and stuff so they can make their own. It's amazing stuff. So I try that. Secondly, there's quite a lot of trials that have gone on for clinical hypnosis. Arguably, I can't tell whether there'll be some in your area, but I would absolutely look at anywhere that can give you some clinical trials, potentially in clinical hypnotherapy. Those microbiomes as well, your kefir can be grown in water or soy milk or almond milk or goat's milk or whatever you want. Excuse me. So I would absolutely have a look at that. And like I said, any kind of clinical hypnosis, look at trials because I know that they're very effective. In fact, who's got anything, one of the things that I'd say is always look out for clinical trials. A lot of them are not medical, even though they're run by medical practitioners and they're at universities or at hospitals. Often they're psychological ones, they're trying new methods and their opportunities are really big. And they've been trialing things like psilocybin, which is classic magic mushrooms when I was a kid, for depression. They've been trying out lots of different psychotropics and they'll be doing the same for things like gut health. But honestly, kefir is amazing. And also, I know it sounds really awful, but diet, you say you can't eat the foods you want to eat, but actually that isn't a bad thing if you can acknowledge what you shouldn't eat and what you need to eat, because sometimes it's about acceptance. Sometimes it's like a peaceful acceptance of this is the way it is for us. What can we learn from this? What can we learn for ourselves from this? And how can we make things more interesting for us in the things that we can use? Like I said, if you've not got my app, Appy, it's not fully finished yet. It's meant to have come out this week, the full version, but as ever, developers find hitches and in the next few days it will be a bigger app. So it's Appy Wellbeing. I think you just put Appy into the search now and it comes up. But there's going to be loads of meditation programs on there, lots of recipes. So if you've got particular dietary issues, you can have a look there and hopefully engage in a way that's more positive for you. But I definitely look at clinical trials as well. Can we talk about the link between suicide and lockdown? Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because the problem with suicide figures is that they don't come out for a period of time. It took over 8 months for my father's death to be ruled as a suicide. So we won't find out. And because of the backlog with coroners, and also I think some of the labelling of death certificates, suicide will be something that may be minimised in one way or another, but in my opinion has definitely grown. The initial study that I don't agree with at all, that was carried out by somebody who also has, shall we say, positive links with people in, shall we say, places of power, I don't particularly believe that study. It was done on a particular section of the community and it doesn't reflect my experience. And certainly when you come to this live, we've had several incidences where we've had to get ambulances and where the police have gone to people's houses or where we've had to get in touch with people's families. I know this is a mental health live and I know that a lot of you come here because we all have mental health issues. But for me, there has been an increase. 7.3% we were told ages ago that lockdown had impacted on us. I don't buy that for a second. I've never heard of as many suicides as I've heard of in the last 12 months, particularly of young people. Even if I'm wrong, I think that the impact on mental health has been enormous. And if we think about the link between lockdown and suicide, let's just anecdotally imagine that the cases that we've heard about are higher than normal, which for me, it has been that case. You just have to think about the human condition. We are born to be social. We can't even move around when we're born because we're so reliant on other human beings. You know, our brain is so developed and it can't develop enough. It needs to develop more, so it requires to get out of the womb this kind of body to be formed, but not well enough to do what a giraffe would do, you know, get up and walk around. That's how important our brain is, and it has to get through the vagina, and it can't do that when it's fully formed. That's why you've got the frontella there that's soft. So basically, you know that as a human being, you're fully reliant. And it's why we have attachment issues when we've had crappy parents. It's because we're so reliant on parents, and then we're so reliant on social bonds. Now, what arguably is meant to happen as a human being is we're meant to live in tribes. I mean, it's not like anybody talks about that anymore. It's so weird. It's like people are rewriting the human code. I'm never going to stop saying it and speaking it because I feel like it's going to be something that kind of gets eradicated. Every great community lived in tribes. It's how we survived. Like, close together, sharing food, sharing community, sharing conversation, sharing wisdom. And I think that lockdown has done the absolute opposite of that. It doesn't matter where you are on that side, you know, whether you're really pro it or really against it. The point is, we can't deny that human beings being locked away, not getting enough sunlight, not being around the people that they love, at times being denied access to people who are dying, at times being denied access really to education, at times being locked up with their predators, at times feeling that they had no autonomy, at times being fully isolated and not allowed to see anyone, at times being absolutely terrified that they might kill somebody that they love, at times being terrified that they might die, having a 24-hour news stream into their home counting deaths, even though the belief is only 6% of those were actually specifically COVID deaths. The point is, this has been going on for a year. In and out, in and out. Can I trust this world? Do I get afraid of this world? Can I trust this government? Do I feel afraid of this government? All these feelings are huge. Suicide happens because of contributory factors, without a doubt. What contributory factors occurred? So if we're going to look at lockdown and suicide, whereas for some people, and there might be some who actually found that those contributory factors reduced, I would never deny that. Let's say you were massively stressed in your job, you have a really nice family, and you know you've got a reasonable living, and then suddenly somebody goes, you've got a year and a half off paid. Like, for some people, that's going to ultimately change their world, their perspective, their mental health, their mental wellness, and that says something about the way we've gone wrong in our society regarding work-life balance, but also understandably reduces contributory factors. Arguably, the same goes for people who are suddenly finding themselves massively stressed at home, along with all those other things I've just mentioned. They're contributory factors that can escalate it, aren't they? And I think that, without a doubt, in my opinion, that will have happened. That will have occurred. So I definitely think there's a link between lockdown and suicide. I think there's a link between our society. I've got lots of thoughts on that probably are not right for this live and are probably too political and probably are a bit, shall we say, conflictual for other people's perspectives, my own views on it. As a daughter of suicide, I think I understand it differently to a lot of people. But that's for another time maybe, and maybe a smaller group, maybe a private group where, you know, things won't get taken out of context and put anywhere that I don't want it to go, shall we say. Haven't seen my boyfriend for 6 months now. Issues with his ex are likely going to delay more on top of the shit world right now. Can't paint much at the moment and constantly frustrated that I can't fund my business idea. Plus, I can't seem to write books I started years ago. Since brain damage, feel like the world needs destroying right now. There's a lot of feelings there. So first of all, it sounds like you've got a blockage. And obviously you say you've got brain damage. So I don't know what kind of brain damage that is. I also don't know whether you have a specific type of brain damage or whether the doctors have told you that you can expect a particular impact, or whether this is something that hasn't been necessarily affecting you previously, but since lockdown, you've started to feel that brain fog. And arguably, I don't know which one it is, but certainly when it comes down to creativity and writing, a lot of that requires liberation, a lot of that requires experience. I certainly know that I write best when I'm feeling like there is either space to explore it or where I'm reacting to a particular experience and feeling. The last 12 months have felt very stifling. So if you think about yourself as an artist, and I do think that artists feel things in a way that can be really intense. It's one of the reasons that artists are so creative and so capable at showing us new paradigms and new perspectives. But it can also be very overwhelming, and you feel the way the world is. And at the moment, it feels a little bit like the parallel for you is that your creativity has been stilted and stifled because the world has been stifled. So if you explore the fact that, you've not been able to see your boyfriend, you've had things stopped. It's almost like things have been put on hold. And now you're frustrated because you're thinking that you've lost something, you're not capable of doing something that you've always used as a creative outlet. But what if this is a time of manifestation? What if this is a time and a period of gestation where, yes, it's frustrating, and yes, you feel like things are on hold, but actually this is just a period of creating internally, so that at some point you're going to find that you start painting again and writing again. But it's just going to need that opportunity to kind of create that stillness where you are and wait. Just be patient. That word, patience is the gift of patience, is true. The more patient you are, the more patient you become. The more frustrated you get, the opposite of that is true. So like when you're frustrated, you're being taught to seek calm. Really, really are taught to seek calm. So what can you do to create a calm in your world? Even if that's just like kind of doing some meditation. I know I talk about that a lot, but how often do people actually go and do it when I said it? I often have this where people will be like, I really want to be less frustrated. And I'll be like, okay, it's time to meditate. It's time to really connect with that. And then they won't go and do it and they won't change their state. So you need to do something that's going to help to change your state. But I almost feel like, excuse me, as a creative, you're somebody who's going to need to kind of acknowledge what's going on and bubbling inside you. And maybe that's this period where there is something transitioning within you as a creator. And when you just let it be and allow it to gestate, it will come to its growth. And when it comes down to your relationship with your partner and the fact that you can't see him, again, it feels like there's a parallel of being stuck. So maybe just like allow yourself to accept the stuckness, but see it as a period before transitioning to growth. That mindset is really helpful. I can really remember Professor William West, when I was training, I was talking to him about hating the feeling of being trapped and stuck, like feeling that icky stuckness. And it was really, really frustrating me. And he just said, oh, you should feel excited because it always becomes before growth. And it was really obvious on one level, of course, when you feel stuck, suddenly you find movement. And in the end, you arrive wherever you're arriving and then continue to keep arriving different places. But now I see stuckness as an awakening to something new. And I know it's just a different perspective and it might not work for you, but it's certainly helped me. And again, as a creator, as an artist, you're going to feel the world more heavily than other people at times. Hi Emma, hope you're okay and safe. I'm really worried, a bit depressed about climate change. Do you have any mind techniques and advice on how to come and just positively regard this? When it comes down to climate change, I'm going to assume that you're worried about it getting worse, or are you worried about all the stuff that's going on at the moment around climate change and things like the World Economic Forum and all the stuff that you see in lots of different places? I don't know which one it is. But either way, this is going to sound like defeatist, but it's not. Ask yourself the power that you have to deal with that. It's something I have to ask myself constantly. There are so many things in this world I think are rotten. There are so many things in this world that I think are deeply unfair. There are so many things in this world that I find deeply unjust. There are so many people in this world that I find wrong. And there are so many things in this world I would choose to change. And if I concentrate on those things, then I will spend my life completely unhappy because I will never have the power to affect the things that I need to affect and have the impact that I would wish to have impact on. It's really important to recognize the power that you have. So If you're worried about climate change and you're starting to panic about what you think the impact will have, you can't think about the wider world. You can't be Greta Thunberg, you can't be her. Like, remember, that's a PR machine behind that. It's not like a 16-year-old really got on stage and did that. Obviously, she's amazing, but there's a whole PR behind that. There's a very specific reasoning behind that. Because otherwise, every 16-year-old would be there, wouldn't they? My 18-year-old would be on stage talking about veganism. So there has to be PR behind that. So you can't be that because you haven't got a massive marketing team behind you. You haven't got somebody taking you on a boat. It's just not the way it works. You have power, though, over your own world. So instead of affecting change on the macro, which is pretty impossible, you can affect change on the micro. It's about making sure that you do your best, your bit. You make a difference to your world. You educate the people around you on how to change their world for the better. Those micro moments, those micro changes make a huge difference. Often we underestimate the power of the self. It's why people are nasty and troll. It's why people write horrible things to people. It's why people bully people. It's because the truth is, when human beings have no recognition of their self-power, they aren't aware of their impact. I'm not letting people get off with being dicks. They're still dicks for doing it. What I'm trying to get across is they're not thinking that you're going to be impacted on. They have such low self-esteem and deep insecurities, whether they acknowledge them or not, that when they're doing that stuff, they're doing it because they don't feel a sense of power. They don't imagine that you're going to read it and feel terrible about it. And it's the same in this situation. It's like you have to recognize your power. You are not helpless. You are not hopeless. You are not somebody who cannot make a difference. It's just that you have to choose to make a difference that you can manage and you can feel proud of. It's like my son is vegan. I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of the fact that he's done that. But he can't do what he really wants to do, which is to stop industrial farming. He can make a difference by educating his friends as to why industrial farming is terrible, like I can with people. And you know what? When you make a difference, like my husband now doesn't eat meat, or when you accept that other people have a different opinion to you, but they learn that maybe they're going to go and make sure that they get organic eggs, or they're going to go to an organic bee honey place so that they're not doing the industrial farming. You're having an impact. So don't worry about global warming. One, you're going to be fine. Your lifetime is going to be a lifetime where we don't ever have the impact that anybody will imagine will happen in like a million years. Number two, the world knows what she's doing. Don't get caught up in all the media stuff. If we're walking around saying save the planet, we may as well have t-shirts saying save ourselves. The planet's going to do fine without us. She's amazing. The universe knows exactly what balance is. And believe me, if we mess with it, then she'll find a way. That's what the universe does. That's what the world does. That's what planet Earth does. She is fine. We might need to look after ourselves in thousands of years to come, because obviously the more resources that we use, the more we industrially farm, the more we destroy the Amazon. It's on us, not planet Earth, that we're going to have to deal with the consequences. So every time you make an effort in the world, like you are doing, to be more conscious, you change the world. You might feel like you're not doing because it's not on a grand scale, but it is. And every time you connect with somebody, whether it's just telling them how to be a bit more eco-friendly, or telling them about like the fabric conditioner that they use and the fact that you can get eco, those are things that make a difference. Turning off your electricity, doing things that actually has impact. Learning, growing, figuring things out yourself in that way, that's how you make an impact. And who knows where that leads you. But if you concentrate on the macro, if you concentrate on changing everything, stopping everything, you're going to fail. And what's the point of all this energy and resource and knowledge and desire if all you're going to do is fall over because you've not managed to do what you set out to do because it's too ridiculously huge? Change the world that you're living in yourself, and then try to change some people around you so they've got better habits. And believe me, if everyone does that, the world dramatically shifts and changes. The world dramatically shifts and changes. And that's how you deal with that kind of anxiety, okay? You be the change in the world that you want, and You accept that that's enough. Because if everybody accepted that that was enough and did that themselves, the world would be a better place. We don't need narcissistic megalomaniacs telling us what we're allowed to eat and what we're not allowed to eat. We just need to be more conscious. We don't need globalists and people in power telling us what's right or wrong. We need to do that work ourselves. The thing that is wrong in the world at the moment is we're not trusting the self. If we do not trust the self, we do not trust the state that we live in. We do not trust our environment. We do not trust the way that we live. We do not trust our emotional experience. We do not trust who we are uniquely. It's important that we build that trust. And much of that comes from knowing instinctually and just intuition-wise that we are unique individuals who can make a difference in our world. And we don't need somebody telling us what that world needs to be like. She's going to be fine. And that's something I've always grown up knowing. You know, as somebody who was into animal rights as a young person, and still very much today, I've always known that planet Earth is absolutely fine. And she's going to be fine. Whether that impacts on us in the long term as we as a race, but that's not our lifetime to have that conversation over. The most important thing is to know that the thing about this universe and the thing about particularly planet Earth, if you take a moment and you read anything about the actual creation of Earth, whatever your belief systems, everything had to be perfect. Like, it's stunning. When you actually read about hydrogen and carbon and oxygen and the Big Bang and all the things that needed to collide, that needed to collaborate, that needed to occur in a single moment so that life could be, and not just be, could flourish. It's astoundingly beautiful. And it did it without any human. She does not need our help, our intervention for her to survive. Maybe for us too is a question that we can ask ourselves. But let's never forget the arrogance of certain humans who believe that they're brighter than the sun and bigger than the moon and more controlling of this world than any human will ever have the right to be. Be the change you want to be. Make the changes you can. And trust yourself. It's something that we all need to do more. Because when you feel it's off, it's off. And when you feel it's right, it's right. I'll see you on Wednesday. Lovely chatting. See you then.